There's an interview with Mr. Sloan Bomar, B-O-M-A-R, 1726 Doningham, D-O-N-I-N-G-H-A-M, Doningham Drive, Knoxville, Tennessee. Interview conducted by Dr. Charles Johnson at the Center for the Study of War and Society. Interview conducted on Monday, July 28th, in the offices of the Center. Yeah, normally what I do is I approach these without any particular agenda. All I want to do is to have on record the experiences of the individual, sort of what their lives were like before they went in service, and then their time in the service, and what happened afterwards. It's normally I start off asking where you were born and when and where you're from and family stuff before you went in service.
Well, I was born in South Carolina. I was reared in South Carolina. I spent most of my early life from about age 7 to college in Ohio in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had an older but a good friend who was an aviation nut. He built bomb airplanes. But I applied for Georgia Tech because of the cooperative training program. Well, it really wasn't because of cooperative training at Georgia Tech, but I was wanting to go to engineering school, and as got admitted, was waiting for the next year to start. And my friend, who was going to the University of Cincinnati, got wind of this. He gave me a real good lecture on the cooperative training program at the University of Cincinnati. And that program was started there. But there are a lot of schools in the country. It's first-rate concept. So I wound up going there, and I started out in chemical engineering, and got subsequently I got qualified to get a BS degree in metallurgical engineering, which I switched to. And I was into my 3rd year of a 5-year course because of the cooperative training. It's a 5-year curriculum. When the Japanese dumped on us in Hawaii in 1941. How old were you then? I would have been, I was 20. Let's see, 40. I was 41. It was just after my 20th birthday. I was born November 1920. The draft operated, and you kept hearing things about the importance that people, those in engineering training and such, the military is going to need these backgrounds and some of that people. So stay in school. Well, not too long after the draft started operating strongly, I found that the draft board up there had all of this fruitful picking over the University of Cincinnati, all these young guys. And the proposition was that, yeah, they'll give you a student deferment, 4F or whatever it was. But the catch was that if they come up needing somebody, they pull you. They draft you, and you've lost any choice of what. You've completely lost any control over your future at that point. And I didn't really have a great desire to wind up being an infantryman. And so during that first year, things started going downhill. My schoolwork wasn't all that great. And by the next fall, I decided that I would just go ahead and bite the bullet, so to speak, and I wanted to join the Navy. And of course, this caused a big uproar at home, especially with my mother. But in November, on my birthday of 42, I joined the service. They sent me to Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, to attend the aviation radio school. And radio seemed to be an appealing prospect. Maybe I'd learn enough that some of this I might be able to use later on in my life. That turned out to be an illusion as the time went by, because the interest in naval aviation at that point for enlisted personnel was to train people. In the case of combat aircraft, the radio mind was to know how to turn the dials and communicate and send and receive code at 15 words a minute. That was the first objective, and minimal sort of information about how radios operate. You had a black box with knobs on it. That was about the technology that you were given. Also went through gunnery school at Hollywood, Florida. And that whole operation took a little less than a year to go through the trade school and the gunnery school. And so it was probably in September of '42, I was shipped along with a batch of other people that had just finished trade school at Jacksonville at the same time.
Would have been September 43 or 42?
September 43.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We were sent to San Francisco. There were 22 of us. 21 of us Navy and one specialist in radar from the Army. And they put us on a Liberty ship. And you hear about these jokes about the all-expense paid trips by the service people. Well, what they did is there was a Liberty ship, which we subsequently found out was loaded with military ammunition supplies. We were one ship convoy that was sent to Espiritu Santos in the New Hebrides. And to accommodate the 22 of us, they had built two little bunkhouses and strapped them to the deck of the Liberty ship. It really was, it wasn't this troop ship horror that you hear about. It was a leisure. It took us about 3 weeks to go at 10 knots an hour to go down Espiritu Santos. And it could have been a hell of a lot worse. It really was very nice for 3 weeks of ocean fare. So I got there, and then the hell started again because there was a large naval manpower pool, and it had just received an influx of hundreds of sailors that had been rescued from the sinking of a cruiser. And it may have been in the Battle of the Coral Sea. It may have occurred about that time. I've forgotten what event the cruiser was involved in, but
probably a little later than that.
Yeah, it may have
Coral
been.
Sea is May of '42. And that would have been quite a bit too
Oh,
early.
okay, yeah.
Santa Cruz Islands,
Yeah.
maybe, or something.
Okay. Well, there was a lot of naval activity around Guadalcanal that was going on.
Through the whole thing, all the way through.
Yeah. So the place was just bulging with people, and it was a rat race, really. So I don't remember. I was there not too long, maybe a couple of weeks, and there were 8 or 10 of us that were picked up and flown up the Guadalcanal, where the squadron VB-104 was in operation. They had lost some people, and they needed to make up additional crews. And so they took us unexperienced people and sprinkled us around through the squadron.
How did it feel going in as a replacement?
It didn't feel real good because you were really the new kid on the block. And these people not only, they had flown together pre-war in a PBY squadron called VP-71. And they'd been in the Pacific for some time. So all these guys all knew each other.
Mm-hmm.
The only common denominator for us who were going in at that time is we'd gone through trade school together. But other than that, we were all strangers anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little bit uncomfortable. But I was fortunate that the first radioman they took the second radioman out of one crew and made him a first radioman on a new crew. And then I became second radioman on a fellow that he was a first class petty officer rating, and he had lots of experience, and he was a fairly tolerant sort of individual of the newcomer, the neophyte. So that break-in wasn't too bad.
Did you find your training useful, or did you have to sort of relearn what you needed to do?
No, the training, the operation of the radio equipment was essentially as I'd been trained.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I never became very fluent in Morse code, either reception or sending, but the requirements in aircraft operation compared to shipboard are altogether different. You know, you can get by with fairly slow transmission, and you don't get a whole lot of traffic if you're flying around on a search mission.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the biggest uncertainty, especially the people that you're joining, is that your experience, you don't have any combat experience. Mm-hmm. And of course you're an unknown quantity. And the way the aircraft that we were operating in is the PB-4Y1 is the Navy version, which represents small changes from the Army B-24. And if you man a gun position, the radio operator, there's the first radioman and the second radioman, and one's on radio and the other one mans the upper deck turret, which is the turret behind the pilots on the top of the airplane. There's a tail turret, a powered turret, and there's a bow powered turret, and at that time there was a ball turret underneath. And then you have two manually operated 50 caliber machine guns at the waist hatches, one on each side. And if you're in the turret operating, there's nobody that's going to be able to help you do anything. You do what you're supposed to do, or maybe the whole crew pays the consequences. Mm-hmm. So you can see that an unknown quantity coming into the crew must have been kind of stressful for them as mm-hmm. well as the newcomer. Mm-hmm. And you just learn on the job. They can teach you just so much. But Guadalcanal, the Guadalcanal experience was essentially over with. There were a couple of air raids, but the activity now at Solomons.
Mm-hmm. Of Mid-Georgia, Bougainville,
yeah.
Villa La Vella, Bougainville.
Yeah, New Georgia, Bougainville, and Coast Rabaul and New Britain. Well, the operation of the squadron was based on, there were two squadrons, each having normally 15 airplanes, operational aircraft. And things were set up to fly 10 planes a day, with 5 planes and crews coming from each of the squadrons. Mm-hmm. So this meant that you would usually fly one day and then you'd have 2 days off. And the nature of the flying was primarily to provide intelligence for the Navy and the Army to operate militarily. So they knew as much as we could provide about any Japanese activity on the ocean. And the area covered from Guadalcanal was divided into 10 sectors, and they ranged from the westernmost sector flew up the outside of the slot and north of Rabaul and New Ireland, and then there were 9 other sectors that ranged eastward I think the easternmost sector went out to a small spot of land called Ocean Island. And these flights would be nominally range from maybe 700 to 850 miles, and with a few exceptions, of outbound and across maybe 75 miles or so and back. And that gave pretty good coverage of the ocean that any Japanese would have to, naval activity would be approaching the Solomon. It was lots of hours and hours of looking at water, mostly. Mm-hmm. The sectors that went near the Solomon Islands, you were well off the coast at Rabaul, but depending on what the Japanese were up to, you may or may not encounter any Japanese counterpart doing what you're doing, or if there happened to be any Japanese ship movement, you might run into some aircraft from aircraft carriers. And that would be kind of bad news. The other places...
did you fly so the planes were in, your 5 planes were in sight of each other, or
No.
you're flying on different headings?
2 planes together, it was crowded sky. There was, all these sectors were normally 1 plane.
So you were on your own, essentially.
You're on your own. It's just you and the Almighty for 8 or 10, 12 hours. At variance of what I just told you, those sectors that were considered real hot were occasionally, they assigned 2 aircraft to. They'd fly together, feeling that maybe 2 would be better able to take care of themselves than just 1.
Do you remember your first mission particularly?
As a matter of fact, I don't. I don't remember the first one. I guess in a way I was lucky beyond belief because of the quick turnaround. Now, the crew I was in, we never encountered aircraft per se. Now, if you read these air action reports, it sounds like a continuum of all kind of things going on. Well, you figure each day there are 10 airplanes out there, and maybe the contact dates won't be successive each day that somebody saw something. So it's not that kind of activity usually. Maybe 1 plane in the squadron would encounter some hostile activity, or a couple, or they'd see a ship. Now, the concept was, number 1 priority is that you provide information on Japanese naval movement. That's number 1. Having essentially searched your sector in the sense that you've gone out to the end, and the pilots were given a discretion to attack what were described as targets of opportunity. And targets of opportunity may take the form of barge traffic, it may take the form of making a 1-plane strike against island outposts that the Japanese may or may not have had some people on at the time. There were some places where the Japanese would move for a while for whatever reason. And there were runs made on these places where there was a lot of activity on those circumstances because you encountered anti-aircraft fire, and maybe they get some of these airplanes airborne if they happen to be there at the time. Then you've got to face up to coping with the aircraft. There was naval movement in the form of freighter ships that may be accompanied by escort vessels, either DEs or DDs. So the pilot, again, depending a lot on personality, how aggressive the individual was, and the circumstances, his judgment of whether or not he felt it was fairly rational to go and attack a ship that might be under escort. He had that decision. He made once he had fulfilled his primary mission, which was to search his sector.
You think did you seem to have more people who were aggressive or more people who were cautious?
The first two, I didn't know the personalities that well.
Mm-hmm.
In the second two, there was a broad spectrum of personalities, as you might guess.
Mm-hmm.
There were those who were aggressive with intelligence, so to speak. They made what I would consider rational decisions. They weren't foolhardy, but were willing to take on a lot. There were others who were really showed poor judgment in the sense of they were too gung-ho, and they may have bitten off more than they could chew, and as a result, they got themselves in trouble. In both tours, we start out with about 180 people, I think was about the staffing of the squadron. And in both cases, in both tours, they lost a little over 50 people, which means
that's a lot.
5 aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Losses could be to enemy action, or you may have run some real bad weather, or due to circumstances, maybe got involved in something that you had to use a lot of military power, and your gas consumption was real high, and they didn't have enough to get home on when it was all over with, and they had to ditch. But personality-wise, there was a broad spectrum. There were some people that were very conservative. The pilot, the principal pilot for the first crew I was put in, was by nature an aggressive person. It was just that at that stage of things where we were operating from, the opportunities to interact militarily with Japanese were not very large. But given having an opportunity, he would be inclined to take an aggressive mode. But he was a good pilot, I think.
How did you feel about that?
I had mixed feelings. I was scared at times,
Yeah.
but I knew that was why we were there. And to some extent, you can always rationalize that if you don't do what needs to be done, it may mean that somebody else is going to have to pay a price. You always, I think, are invigorated by the prospect of getting another airplane. In the second tour, our pilot I would place in the median category of gung-ho-ness. He again, I think, was a good pilot. He was a little older than average. He used great discretion, and especially in attacking any shipping targets. He wanted to stack the deck as much as he could in his favor. But anytime we saw an airplane, he'd take off after it, given half an opportunity. And we almost made him ace. We got 4 Japanese aircraft for sure, and 2 probables. So we missed making him an ace by 1.
Is that the way it worked? The pilot would become an ace if the plane got 5?
The Navy recognizes the officer corps to a much greater extent than they do enlisted personnel.
Mm-hmm.
You may ride the same airplane, but it's Lieutenant Waldeck's aircraft crew, and any reporting of what was done is usually in terms of Waldeck and company.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't seem quite fair.
No, it's the military service is. I don't fully appreciate the validity of this marked separation of officer corps and enlisted. That you need to have people who do things without stopping to give argument about it or giving too much thought to it, perhaps. If you're told to take the hill, you're not supposed to have a discussion about taking the hill. You're supposed to take the hill. So maybe to the logic of that is that you also make a pretty rigid demarcation between fraternizing, so to speak, between enlisted and commissioned people. Our service, our type of military service was unique in the sense that we probably had less formality between these two facets of the manpower than any place I can think of. Certainly not aboard ship. We wound up living in jungles.
Yeah, what were your accommodations like there on Guadalcanal?
On Guadalcanal, I got there about 3 months after they'd been there, so there was a lot of preliminaries that went on and were settled. The living accommodations to begin with were pretty poor. They weren't tents. And the mosquito situation, malaria situation was horrendous. Mud everywhere. But they eventually got Quonset huts, so that there were the living was somewhat more comfortable and healthy. Mm-hmm. The Quonset huts were better protected from the standpoint of the insect and things. You had to take Attabrin as a
got your Attabrin tan, did you?
But you're thrown together in this kind of living condition. It's not like being on board ship, and so there was a heck of a lot less formality. There was no formality as far as our camp life while we were overseas. That sort of stuff came back as you were drawn back to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. Things went back to more normal. So it made life a whole lot more bearable, I think, from the standpoint that there was not all the spit and polish carried. It would have been totally ridiculous, really. Mm-hmm. But you didn't wear uniforms. You wore shorts and your field shoes. And you didn't put on a Navy uniform until you got back to civilization again. So, and that was true both tours. Mm-hmm. So there was a much more rapport, I think, between the commissioned and the non-commissioned people than you would normally find in a service organization.
Mm-hmm. How was the food?
The food in general was not so hot. It had been for New Zealand butter and jam and bread. I don't know how to make it. The pilot eggs were terrible. The Lend-Lease mutton from Australia was terrible. You could smell it all the way up to the camp area from the mess. And I didn't have trouble saying shrimp. I'll put it that way. But the guys on board ship had a heck of a lot better deal out of it than we were kind of orphans between the Army. The Army ran things on shore, pretty much. You lost some of the benefits, along with this informal atmosphere. You lost some of the benefits, I think, that you would have on board ship from the standpoint of food. The let's see, peculiarities. It always seemed a little bit. Well, this was true on Mauritania now, more so than anywhere else. In Guadalcanal, there were Japanese, a lot of Japanese still left on Guadalcanal, but they were out there barely surviving, if at all. When we later moved, when we came back and went to Morotai as the first stop on the return of the second tour, it was much closer to Japanese resources than on Guadalcanal. So there was a different aspect to life on Morotai. We got there on November the 3rd, 1944, my birthday. There was a camp area. We had individual tents with 4, 5, 6 guys in them at the edge of the jungle in a balsa forest. Balsa wood is, to me, I never had pictured the tree that it came from, but these are humongous trees. They're big things and tall. Well, now they grew tall in a jungle when it was a jungle. But to make this camp area, they went in and cleaned out a lot of stuff, but they left all these tall trees there. And it turns out that these trees sticking up by themselves were no longer all that stable, and they would get blown down now and then. There'd be this great big tree falling down through the camp area. Fortunately, it never killed anybody. There were some guys that were hurt on one of them, but that wasn't a real asset to the camp area by any means. And from our camp area, let me back up. Morotai was a relatively small island that I heard there were about 5,000 Japanese troops when it was taken. Adjacent from that is a much larger island called Halmahera. There were about 50,000 Japanese there. And the concept of leapfrogging was really put to advantage there in that they went around to the back door and they took little old Morotai and established a fighter strip fairly quickly, and in effect isolated support for these troops on Morotai from Halmahera, where the principal body of the Japanese were. They would attempt to bring over supplies by barge and such, but that was a rough go, because as soon as they established air superiority, the Japanese were pretty well frozen in place. It was essentially impractical to maintain the 5,000 on our island. So those guys they took enough. The Americans took enough land at the south side of the island to build an airstrip, and then pushed them back and established a perimeter. And this is only a small fraction of the total island now that's under immediate control. Mm-hmm. And the Army had a line that they manned out there to separate the Japanese from the rest of the activity there, the airfield. And it was only 500 yards at the place that we were located from us, and our living quarters, and the Japanese troops that were there. So you had this crazy, weird situation where at night, if you went to a movie, there was always a movie you could go to at night, and you'd hear these people popping away at each other down, and every now and then you see a flare go up. It just wasn't it was unreal in a way. It was unreal. They never gave us any real trouble, although they gave us some scares. The first night we had an air raid. We were there on Morotai for something like 50 days before we went further up into the Philippines. And it is my recollection we had 54 air raids during that period. They were nuisance raids to a large extent, but they did destroy some of our airplanes. We lost 2 or 3, and the Army lost some. Probably the most effective factor from the Japanese standpoint was that they kept everybody awake at night, and it made it kind of hard to go out and fly a 10, 12-hour patrol after you've been awake half the night. And you know, if you go to sleep, it would take a little bit. If it's the wrong time, it's all throat. That's the end.
Mhm. How high did you fly when you were on patrol?
The
Is there a
the-
standard?
the PP4Y1 apparently operated most efficiently for our kind of flying at about 8,000 feet. Now it depended on what was happening. If you had wide open expanses to look at from 8,000 feet, you weren't so high up that you couldn't see stuff pretty well. You could see a good distance. What happened in bad weather, you may be forced down to fairly low altitudes to clear clouds and things so that you wouldn't miss something that way. The targets of opportunity thing came into the picture. Now, the tax or target of opportunity, if it were something that the pilot decided that he wanted to attack, but he thought it was going to be really foolhardy to do it at low altitude, he might attack it from several thousand feet up, say 5,000-6,000 feet, make a bomb drop. But attacks on things were more often done at low altitudes, and this means maybe 200 feet or less. And I'm sure that the people who designed the airplane never pictured that B-24 or that PP4Y1 being used as a low altitude bomber, but that was the way it was used.
Did you always have bombs on board when you went out?
Almost invariably. There were some patrols, some sectors that the nature of the thing was not the 700 to 800 mile, but maybe 1,000 miles. And in those cases, you may have to exchange for a bomb load, bomb bay gas tanks. And with those, we could extend our range somewhat. I think each one of those is about 300 gallons, but I'm not sure about that. There were some flights that may range up to close to 16 hours.
It's a long time.
Yeah. But those were unusual.
I imagine you got to know the other people in the crew pretty well, pretty quickly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the second time round, well, the first time, yeah. When I didn't know anybody to start with, yeah. But the second one, we trained together all the way from being assigned to cruise in San Diego, and we flew as a crew. From there, back to Hawaii, and from Hawaii back to Marta and on. So we knew each other pretty well.
About the crew, you tended to be pretty much the same age, but from different parts of the country, different backgrounds.
Well, the age, as you might, I was probably the oldest enlisted guy in our crew. By then, I was 21. Let's see what happened. Went in when I was 21. A year, I would be 22. So before it was over, I was about 23. The other enlisted guys were, except for one fellow who was regular Navy, and he may have been close to my age, but we had 4 other fellows that I think were younger, and at least 2 of them weren't much more than about 18 or 19 years old. Just kids. You know. And one of the remarkable things, I don't know how accurate this is, but I understand that the Navy increased its manpower by a factor of 10 during World War II.
I would imagine.
So that there were the basic 10% of people that really knew what they were doing because they'd been there all along. They were regular Navy. And then there were all these people that they took off the street, and they had to somehow or another prepare them for some serious business. And that preparation, of course, was more or less successful. But I think it's quite remarkable, really, that you could take people out of civilian life and in a year's time give them basics that they draw upon to undertake the kind of things they had to do in the military.
And do it, from what you say, do it really pretty well, pretty effectively.
Well, the end product says that the system, including America's industrial capacity, was as big a factor as any, probably. But you know, when you read these kind of action reports, the things that were going on, you know that a lot of these people had to draw from a depth of stuff in them that they probably didn't even know they had. To turn somebody into a combat warrior from a student or clerk in a store or such.
Or somebody just out of high school.
Yeah.
Do you remember particularly the first time you encountered Japanese aircraft attacking your ship?
The most in our cruise experience, we were only attacked once. We attacked several other times, and it was kind of sitting duck in a way because at least 3 occasions the aircraft were called napping were non-military in the sense that they would probably transport aircraft. The one thing that we encountered in the way of enemy aircraft that we probably weren't supposed to get away with is after the battle, the naval battle of Leyte, when the landings were made, and there's this naval backup, a lot of small aircraft carriers and lightweight ships were offshore, and the Japanese pulled a feint. Well, it wasn't exactly a feint, but they fooled Halsey pretty good. They sent a contingent of ships from the south through Surigao Strait, and then another contingent through San Bernardino Strait to try to destroy this
the landing course.
Their landing. And it was done in such a way as that they feinted with yet a third group of shipping that pulled Halsey off to the north. And there was some real poor communication between Halsey and what he was up to and what the command people back in Hawaii were aware was going on. And these ships got into and actually were giving the landing fleet a bad time, and would probably have destroyed it if they pressed their time. Well, after the Japanese ships dispersed, and part of them went back through Surigao Strait, and the question arose as to whether or not part of them had gone down to a place called Balikpapan, which is on the west coast of Borneo, on the Makassar Strait. We at that time were operating out of Maritime. We would normally run a sector that would check the northern part of Makassar Strait and the northern end of Borneo around to Brunei Bay. And then all of our other sectors were north, west and north of that. But they want to know, did any fleet units go down to Balikpapan? And so we drew the short straw for that particular day and had to fly down and take a look-see. And it was unfortunately, it was a nice clear day. It was a fine day for sightseeing. but there wasn't much cloud cover around. And so I made a point of being involved in the upper deck turret at that point because I felt that I had a little more experience in the second ratingman. And so as we approached Balikpapan, we were close enough to get a look in the harbor, and they could identify what shipping was there. And there was I think a cruiser and some destroyers and maybe some other shipping. But as you approached the city or the harbor, you could see this huge cloud of dust that was being blown up, and it was obvious what was happening. They were getting ready to take off the airplane, and it wasn't too long after the pilots were able to identify what was there, and they turned around to leave, and the Japanese airplanes caught up with us, and there were 5 of them. There were 4 5 fighters, and the 4 of them made attacks on our plane, and the 5th one stood off of the port beam, conveniently, comfortably out of machine gun range, which
instructions or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was there just to watch the taking of the prize, nowhere else. But the others made 6 to 8 guns on us, and this went off about 20 minutes. But they weren't nearly as aggressive. I was kind of surprised, personally, although it was actually really damn comfortable. There were 2 runs that, in particular, that I recollected. One fighter came in looking to the back of the airplane, off to the left, looking backwards, and he was making a superb run on our tail. And this was one of the earlier passes, and as he opened fire out of range from our consideration. So that got a little closer before we opened up on him. And you could see smoke flowing back across his wings. And somebody in the intercom was saying, "You got him, you got him." What he saw was this guy shooting at us. Probably his 20 millimeter cannon that made enough smoke that you could see it. So that kind of took the edge off of that. It was so bizarre. But it was a good example of the lack of reliability of eyewitnesses at times. Mm-hmm. Well, that was one of several several passes. The other one was a head-on pass. One of the planes passed up and turned, came back at us, and this meant that from the upper deck turret, your guns are straight over the cockpit. They're a little bit behind it, but they're pretty damn near over it. And the thought came to mind, I had tended targets in gunnery school, and I was shocked there how hellish it was then, just being in this revetment with these guys shooting, and all the racket these bullets were making, and they were tearing up the wooden targets and stuff. And that came to mind. I'm going to have to shoot over the pilot's head. He's right at the end of these guns. And so the bow turret, and I shot at him. I think we hit him. They said he went away smoking. He went below us. But I'm sure it was hard on the pilots. They had to take it, though, if there was something coming ahead and you wanted to use the upper deck current. There wasn't any option.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an odd sort of thought that came to mind at a time like that. But
Did they put any holes in your aircraft? Or?
they only hit us a couple of times. This is just conjecture on my part. The Japanese at this point had lost an awful lot of their experience. That was part of it with the Japanese that were located at Nagasaki. But I mentioned I was surprised that they weren't quite as aggressive as they were.
Mm-hmm. They gave us pretty high.
And maybe they just weren't that well trained, and their gunmanship was well, a little bit back off, but that may not be a good analysis, because a few days later there was another plane that went down to do the same thing.
He drew a short straw that day.
Yeah, but this guy, he got close enough that I think he went into the harbor. Now, whether he had some idea of actually attacking something, and I don't know. But before he got back out of the harbor, there were planes that were on his tail, and there were more of them. There were 8 or 10 aircraft. And I think the description may be that the man's name is Noon, N-O-O-N. You may encounter that description. And they just got out by the skin of their teeth, and they got all shot up. They lost their hydraulics. They had holes in all the propellers on it, and the airplane held together. And two fellows got wounded. They weren't too bad. It just was, it tosses the cons. And the fact that the Japanese flyers had gotten a lecture to after our earlier visit. I don't know how they managed to get away with going that far in with that many airplanes attacking them and come out whole. The aircraft would take quite a bit of punishment. The big difference between the Japanese planes and ours was one of the big differences was the presence of self-sealing gas tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was another episode that occurred off the north end of Formosa. After we had gone from Martin to Takwa Lady, which was a hellhole, we were right next to a patio. The runway ran into the harbor or the bay at one end, and there was an ammunition dump in a coconut palm forest at one end. So either end, if you weren't off the ground and well airborne, you were in trouble. We were flying out of Clark Field. There were naval coast watchers on China, along the China coast, that communicated intelligence back. And they had reported what appeared to be a kind of a routine departure of aircraft going from northern Formosa early in the morning going up to Shanghai. And so the squadron skipper decided, probably the Fleet Air Wing captain may have made the decision, to send some aircraft rather than our a normal departure to go out, so we'd be up at the end of Formosa real early in the morning. And, Waldo, the pilot, it was just daybreak, and he spotted this aircraft, I don't know, 10 miles or so away, and turned to try to intercept it. And we overtook it. It was a military plane. It was a medium-sized bomber, but it may not have been manned in that sense. They may have been just using it as a courier personnel transport from Formosa up to Shanghai and back. But we came up on their left rear quarter. We were probably within just a few hundred feet of them, and they never made any indication that they knew we were there. And so the bow gunner took the left engine as a target to begin with, and I took a rear gun position in case there were anybody there. And between the two of us, when the pilot said shoot, he shot, the left engine immediately caught on fire. I shot, and my bullets went through the body of the airplane into the right engine, and it immediately caught on fire. But the plane is still flying. But I think after shooting at the engine, the bow turret guy shot into the body of the airplane, the pilot's compartment. He probably killed all those people right away. But the plane was still flying, and it was drifting along. It slowed down, and our pilot slowed down. He drifted off to the right, and then he started drifting back towards us. And I was sitting there saying, well, no use in shooting any more of my ammunition. May need it later, because he's gone. His engine's on fire. There's no way to get out of this. But he started drifting back towards us, and so we both opened fire on him again. And he did a snap loop and fell down behind us, and tail broke off, and he plunged into the ocean. But it was a graphic example of, in a matter of seconds, if you're not paying attention.
It's a very vivid memory.
Yeah. Those guys they paid a price. They weren't alert. They may have been taking a little snooze because of early reveille. They felt safe, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what other events. Tell you about the Japanese line on Maratai. Well, when we went to Clark Field from Tank Lobin, lady, the Japanese troops had been driven back into the mountains, which were immediately behind Fort Strasburg, was where Clark Field was located, at Fort Strasburg. But there was mountains back there, and they were all dug in. They had caves and things. And the Gulf Harbor at the other end, the strip, there was only maybe 200 feet or so